Carrie, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us today.
Oh,
I remember, thank you. I remember hearing you talk at a professional conference a few years ago, and I'll never forget how you made an audience of 200 plus employment lawyers really sit up and take notice about the human story that sits behind equal pay law. So often we get stuck just in the actual reading of the legislation. And I remember sitting there thinking you were so generous in how much you gave of yourself. And I found your talk powerful and inspiring. And so today I really am grateful that you've agreed to talk to us again about, you know, your story at the BBC. And if I'm not pushing my luck too far and encroaching too much on your generosity, I've got 7 questions that I've prepared, which I think people would really, really like to hear the answer to. Is that okay? Thank you. So I'm going to read off a list. So if I look a bit stilted, forgive me. But my first question, and I know this being an employment lawyer myself and having clients in this area. So many people would say, and I think they're absolutely right, that pursuing an equal pay justice against a larger organisation like the BBC was really courageous. Do you think you would have had that same courage had you been at the beginning of your career?
Thank you, Paul. It's nice of you to say it was courageous. It was certainly hard. I like to think that if I'd had my time again, I'd have been more aware of these issues when I was younger. And that would have necessitated a world in which women generally were more vigilant. And then perhaps it would have required less courage because it would have been more normal. It would have been in the air that everybody breathes, that there is this risk there for women in the workplace, that you need to be alert right from your first days as a working woman all the way through your career, because this can crop up. And I think if you tackle it sooner, if you've developed the muscle to actually stand up for yourself, assert your value in the workplace, and also just the savvy to know that the risk is there, that you have to be sensible about it, you have to have these conversations. And so just to be a bit more grown up about having the difficult conversation, if you can do that in your 20s, it will be much easier than starting in your mid-50s, which is when I started, and when it's very hard because all your habits have hardened in themselves. So it's very difficult for me to kind of break through my taboos about talking about money. And also, I think, you know, it's really hard because the trajectory between men and women at that point in their careers has opened up massively. Yeah. And so for your employer, it's really expensive to put it right. It's like, oh, looking backwards, this is a very serious, you know, hole that we've now got to fill financially if we acknowledge that there's a problem here. So I think for all kinds of reasons, it would be better to start earlier. And also, you know, if you're in your 20s, kind of, what have you got to lose?
Well, it's interesting you say that. So I've just had a client, a graduate, who used the opportunity of it being her first job out of uni to challenge what she felt was unfair. She knew a comparator was being paid more. And she said to me as we were going through the process that she was using it to test having a difficult conversation, putting it right. She didn't want to go forward in her career always having the start of it like this little sort of grain of sand in her tummy that she never dealt with at the time.
I think that's right. I think that's really sensible of that client of yours, because I think if you sit down and submit to what you suspect or you know is an injustice going on around pay, then, you know, what does that do for your self-respect in the workplace, you know, day in, day out? So it has financial implications for you, and it will have financial implications for your family, for your children, but it also has professional implications in terms of whether you can get promoted or not, whether you're being treated as one of the kind of higher paid people. It affects your promotion, your prospects in a workplace. It affects your status in that workplace, because these things are communicated very subtly and indirectly about who has value and who doesn't. And perhaps most important of all, it affects your self-respect.
100%. That's exactly what my client said.
And if you know that you've tackled it and you've successfully tackled it, hopefully, you know, that gives you an enormous amount, I think, of self-confidence going forward. And you can be a more assertive in a good and calm but strong way in the workplace. So I think it benefits you internally as well as you in all these other practical and material ways.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, start early.
Start early.
Start early.
Start early. This is what I mean. I have a daughter of 24 and I have a son of 22. And I tell them both, you know, my daughter, obviously, be vigilant, and all her friends and everybody else I know who's in that age group. And I tell, you know, my son and all his friends and all their male friends, you know, be aware, this is going on. This is affecting your generation too. You imagine maybe that it can't possibly be happening in your era, in your generation. But that is what I thought when I went into the workplace. And look, here we are. And look, here you are. You've got a client who's just in their first job and facing it.
For sure. And that brings me very nicely into question 2. So what would you say to those who are afraid of rocking the boat? I think we've touched on courage, but if you know that your employer is paying you differently to a man doing the same job, if you're a woman, there is that belief that you're going to rock the boat. And I've actually wrote a blog on this. What does rocking the boat actually look like? What is this? Who started this, that you will be rocking the boat? And we've already used that expression already in this interview. So what would you say to those people who are afraid of rocking the boat, but know they're being paid unfairly or unequally?
Well, first I'd say I hear you. I so hear you. It is frightening to rock the boat, and there's no question but that you are rocking the boat if you challenge your employer's pay decisions. You know, for you, it's just about, it's you see it in relation to your own situation and your male comparator, maybe the person, the man who's doing, you know, the same role or a role of equal value. But for your employer, they often have this crazy, lopsided, chaotic, fragile Jenga tower of a pay structure. And they know in their inner heart, it doesn't make any sense. They don't want the outside world to see it. They certainly don't want a tribunal to see it. They don't want to have to reconfigure your pay, because that might mean a whole lot of other things. And therefore they are extremely often, not always, but often extremely defensive about you raising it. And many employers will intimidate female employees in these situations. So you are rocking the boat if you challenge it. And I hear anyone's fear about doing that. I was afraid of doing that for all kinds of there are all kinds of reasons for being afraid, which go from the fear of actually losing your job, the fear of not getting promotion, the fear of just your boss not talking to you, not liking you, not even saying good morning to you. It puts you in a really difficult place at work. And also, you know, work is so much of our identity for many 100%. People. Yeah. And it's your family at some level. I mean, it's like your work family we talk about. So it can be very, very uncomfortable. On the other hand, Paula, what are your options? Because if you don't challenge it, if you just submit to it, you're going to have all these self-respect. You're going to have, you know, really problematic inner feelings going forward. I've seen that a lot, not just in, you know, in my workplace, BBC, but also, you know, all the women who wrote to me after my case went public. It's like I got a horrible insight into the problems that women face when they consider whether to challenge these decisions or not. And when I wrote the book and I was kind of going around talking publicly about equal pay, so many women came up to me in public settings and said, thank you so much for challenging this. I wanted to challenge it, but I never felt able to. And I now look back on my career, these are often older women who were saying this, I now look back on my career, I just wish that I had challenged it, because it sits there like a load on your heart if you're being undervalued consistently day in, day out at work. And so you have a very difficult choice if you're afraid to rock the boat, but you know or strongly suspect that you're being underpaid. And I can only say at that point that you have to do a really careful think about it, about the costs and benefits of challenging it, about what that would look like, and start assembling a little team of thoughtful people around you who can help you.
100%, yeah.
Like Leigh equal pay lawyers who really know all the insides of this and will help you navigate, whether it's through the Equal Pay Advice Service or through your insurer or through your union or whatever.
I think that's right. My own experience, again, of advising people and also being a female employee, is that I think personal discomfort is often the most helpful thing we give an employer in not looking at their pay structures. And it is uncomfortable, but that discomfort is a real boon to an employer. And of course, the counterbalance to that is the quieter we are, the more the status quo is preserved. It's a really, but that the pain is real, I think, and that belief that you just don't want to rock.
And yet, if you can go forward and rock the boat calmly, and while protecting yourself, while not doing more than you can afford emotionally, financially, career-wise, while making quite thoughtful decisions, trying not to kind of react in the moment, because there will be many moments when you are just incredibly dismayed, disappointed, despairing, angry, etc., etc. And so try not to act in any of those. Use that anger to galvanize you, maybe, but try not to do your strategic planning out of that place of anger. And then never do more than you can do at any given moment. I found it very interesting reading what Oprah had said about her experience, because she was underpaid by comparison to her male co-host in her, I think it was her late 20s or early 30s. And she went to the boss and said, look, this is all wrong. And, you know, the boss was completely dismissive and contemptuous of her case. And she walked out of the office and she thought two things at the same time. One was, there will come a moment when I will not put up with this. I know what's going on here and I've clocked it and I will act on it. But that doesn't mean I can act on it or have to act on it today. There will come a moment when I have the strength in my career to engage with this, and I will not forget this moment, but I cannot challenge it here and now. And I think that's wise of her. And I think many women, you know, feel they might have to act immediately, like I have to challenge this, I have to fix it now. But that isn't always the case. There is a time and a place, and sometimes you need to assemble, you know, your strength strategically and tactically.
I like that. I like the promise to your future self. I like that. I like that. Nice. I'm going to look at my third question, if I may. So, right. Yes. You were awarded backdated pay with your salary increase. So that's your male comparators. So that's so far so good. That's what the law does. The equal pay law levels up. There is this myth around leveling down. That doesn't happen. The law levels up. So why did you choose to pay it forward? Not only donating the entire sum that you secured from the BBC, but by providing access to the resources that you have via the EPAS, the Equal Pay Service, and the Fawcett Society, which Leigh is now so pleased and proud to be part of. So why did you pay it forward, Carrie? It's such a generous thing to do.
Thank you. Well, I think this has two parts. One is related to myself and my employer, and the other is related to my experience of the equal pay struggle. So dealing with the first part first, the BBC is quite a special employer. It's obviously a public service broadcaster. It's spending public money. I thought top salaries at the BBC were too high. I still think they are. And I didn't want to be, I didn't want to take more money, more public money personally, in a way that would disadvantage all the people at the bottom of the pile in the BBC, because you know, a pay structure is obviously in some ways a pyramid, and there were these people at the top who were getting paid a lot, and then there were these people down the bottom who were getting paid really very little. And if we at the top use the power of our position and our voice to sort our own problem, there would be less resources for those at the bottom. And I didn't want that to be the outcome for me. But on the other hand, I also was absolutely determined to get equal. So it was throughout the actual fight, it was a constant struggle for me to keep going, knowing that if I won, I would also lose, if you see what I mean, because I would lose my other principle about a fair pay structure. I would win equal pay, but at the expense of what I consider to be a fair pay structure. So the only way of dealing with that to my own satisfaction was to think, if I win, I will give away every penny. And that allowed me, because I didn't want the money, you know, I thought what was wrong, that allowed me to go forward strongly without constantly second guessing my decision to go forward. And I also wanted to, you know, this part one of the answer, I also wanted to confound those who were incredibly numerous in the tabloid media and the kind of anti-BBC or anti-women kind of agenda, who, you know, also were very numerous to my surprise and disgust, who just wanted to kind of nail us down and say that our fight was only about money, that these were greedy processors who just wanted more money. And that wasn't it at all for me. I wanted the self-respect of being equal.
Yeah.
And I wanted my employer to understand that my work was equal. And if they hadn't understood it already, they were, you know, they were going to understand it through the offices of an employment tribunal. And because, just to roll back a moment, they had acknowledged that my work was equal at the very start of my role as China editor. And then the gap opened up, and, you know, the rest is history. So anyway, I wanted to confound those who said we were just greedy by underlining the point that we had a principle involved, and that the principle really, really mattered to all the women involved. And I know, because I've seen the interviews that some of your supermarket workers have done, or care workers, it matters to women that their work is valued equally. It's not just about money. And those who want to do women down kind of undermine them with this line, this spin, that it's just about greed or it's just about more money. It's not. So that's kind of part one of the answer. And then part two of the answer, why I gave the money to the Equal Pay Advice Service rather than to some, you know, animal charity or whatever, was I had the benefit in my fight of you know, great legal advice, a great support team in BBC Women, you know, a public platform because it was the BBC and I was, you know, I was a senior reporter, and all of these things. I had all of these advantages, and yet I still at times found it an extremely frightening and an upsetting, distressing experience. One that, you know, really sometimes felt like it was challenging my mental health, and it felt lonely at times, and I felt really stuck between choices at times. And I really hated the thought that there definitely were, as I knew after I went public and the stories started pouring into me and people started stopping me on the bus or on a station platform or whatever to tell me their stories, I knew that there were women out there who had no help. You know, they couldn't afford a lawyer. They didn't have a public voice. They had nothing in face of this enormously asymmetric fight that they were taking on with an employer who plays, you know, often these games all the time and knows, has all the information, has all the financial advantages, has all the advantage of experience, and they're just alone. And it's just more, you know, it's the extremity of that David and Goliath struggle that really upset me and made me want to do something, to at least a tiny thing, to enable other women to have some of the same support that I'd had. So hence.
Well, I think it's hugely generous. I mean, I've been an employer for, it feels like, millions of years, an employment lawyer, and the equal pay legislation is fiendishly complex. And not only is it complex, it seems to, the plates change all the time. It's one of the main principles of law is certainty. It's what we require in our, you know, in our whole society. The law has to be certain until you get to equal pay law, and every principle can change. There's so many opportunities for the employer to defend it. So anything, for me, especially the lead A lawyer as well, that enables access to justice is just brilliant. I mean, it's just brilliant. So, I mean, huge thank you on behalf of everyone who's eligible for your...
Oh, well, thanks so much. And it would be great if more people would donate as well to that fund and enable the work to go forward, because obviously the more money we have for that, then the more underpaid and low paid women that we can help.
I think, and we sort of like singing our own praises here at Leigh Day. The lawyers that are working with me and providing this service through the Fawcett Equal Pay Service are all working at hugely reduced hourly rates, again, just to contribute to providing access to justice in this area, because it's a hugely difficult subject, emotionally and legally, and very asymmetrical in terms of information and resources. So I think it's brilliant.
It's probably worth saying, it's probably worth stopping for a moment and saying why it's so difficult emotionally, because obviously, you know, I was expressing quite an extreme degree of emotional distress about my own case. And, you know, I am somebody who, you know, my daughter had leukemia. I lost my mother as a teenager. I had breast cancer. I've, you know, spent 4 years being the BBC's China editor and taking on the Chinese Communist Party and being locked in cells overnight and so on. So you might say, and some friends or colleagues or, just members of the general public have asked me why then, would this be so hard? And I think the answer is that, to have your employer belittling you, because that is kind of the name of the game when they get to saying that your work is not equal. It's a really seriously energized campaign of belittlement of a woman's work. And that's horrible to be the target of.
I think that's right. But also it's you're right. People say, and you say, and I agree, it's not about the money, it is about being equal. But employers use money as that measure of value. And when you're doing the same work and the tool by which that value is being assessed is demonstrably
absolutely
lower, you would have, but that's your criteria for measuring value. And so I've never had yet an equal pay client who hasn't felt burnt in their core. There's just quite it's almost like you get like the snot tears of anger. It's just, you can't quite understand the bitter unfairness of it because you just don't get it. You just can't understand how that happened. Then I would probably put a month's wages on our inability to find anybody that didn't agree with the principle that men and women should be paid the same if they're doing the same work. Of course, we all know that you can pay men and women differently if there's written reasons not connected to sex. But that principle, most people, I've never met anyone that doesn't disagree with it. But while money is used as that measure of value within the workplace, if you're the one that's on the lower scale, it cuts to the quick. It's physically painful, my clients report, and it's something that when I've read your book and I hear you talk, you bring that pain to life in a way that not many people can, outside their own personal experience. And so I think anyone listening to you talk will think, oh, so I'm not mad. It's not me, I'm not making this up. This is a real sort of physical pain. And of course, in other areas of discrimination law, your injured feelings are recognised. There is an injury to feeling award, which is not based on economic loss. Equal pay doesn't have that. And you're like, oh, it's one that really does wound as well. It's interesting that it's not there, but when it is there, discrimination, that pain, as I hear it all the time from clients, there's a sense of bitter unfairness that we have as children that we never lose, and that when you then realise might be operating upon you in adulthood through no fault of your own, it hurts. Yeah,
it hurts. But the next thing I'd say about that is, if I had my time again on this, because obviously that's the other thing for women. It's like most women in the workplace are so busy being great at their jobs. Yep. They have not examined equal pay law once in their life. Why would they? And so, and also, this is not an issue that is everyday currency in our society or in the workplace. It's not an issue that employers want to talk about. It's not even particularly an issue that it's not really an issue that your male comparator, your male peer wants to talk about. And it's not even an issue that much that women talk about, or not in my view as much as they should. So it's not really in the ether that much, I don't think. And so we're very underinformed. I mean, you're not obviously, Paula, because you live and breathe it, but most of us, and if I had my time again and I thought, what would I do differently? The key thing, there's nothing about the decisions I made or the actions I took that I would do differently. I think I shouldn't boast, but I actually think I played it right. I stuck to the principle, but I marched forward. I wouldn't be turned away. I just said, you will pay me equally to the very penny. And I never deviated from that. And that gave a kind of inner strength about my position, helped me. However, what I would change about myself through that time is I just wouldn't take it personally.
Oh, really? Nice.
Because, you have to, we've talked about how inevitably you take it personally, and of course you do, and you wouldn't be human if you didn't, for all the reasons we've just discussed. However, at the point where you actually need to take on the strategic battlefield against your employer is not taking this personally at all. It's a game to them. It's a game they want to win. It's a game they're familiar with the rules. It's a game as we've discussed, and so they're just playing the pieces on the board. Yeah. And you need to, I think, or I wish I had to a degree, got out of my, Carrie, injured victim of pay discrimination head, and got into my, just don't take it personally, just play the game.
Yeah.
I did play the game. I played it well, but I really suffered during those years. And I, from my, feelings about the whole thing and my rage, just living with that much anger all the time is not good for you. And it doesn't advance your case. To a certain extent, your anger is galvanizing. So use it to galvanize you. But then if you're smart, and if you can find a way, I think, put it aside and play calmly the pieces on the board. Cool. And your lawyer, Paula, will help you.
Yeah, but for anyone listening, that's really good advice. Don't take it personally. And hopefully, whoever you speak to at EPAS or one of the solicitors here at NDA, we can help neutralize some of that while we help you with the strategy. So that's
because I think, if you think about it like, if you think about it like a game of tennis or boxing or whatever, where there's mind games going on, your employer, this is part of their toolkit to mind game you, right? To gaslight you, to damage your own self-confidence so that you won't go forward, that you won't take it as far as tribunal, that you will settle for 5 pence or nothing. And so, having knowing that that's part of what happens, and that the mind gaming of undermining you and your sense of yourself and your sense of your confidence, of the value of your work, all of that, it's just like, it's a game. I need to resist this.
Well, I guess that's right, isn't it? If you know what's coming down the track, you can you're ready to then to not take it personally. Going to my list. Okay, I thought that's answered question 4 about what we would have done differently. I'm going to jump to question 5. So what
I'm stealing your questions before you've got to
brilliant. Oh, I'm grateful. Obviously my questions I'm going to take as a compliment. They naturally flowed from one another. That's very good. Well done, Paula. So what are you hoping that this scheme will do for individuals experiencing inequality? So what would you like for us, the lawyers delivering this scheme, to give to the people that want to use it?
I think I would like the scheme to calmly inform and support women as they consider these very difficult choices. They are difficult choices. There's no getting away from that. An equal pay struggle is emotionally, financially, in every way challenging. And so I think to feel that you've got somebody on your side who knows how to look at the choices that you have, to understand the next moves on the board, to help you think ahead on the board to how that will look and how you might approach that. Because of course, every individual is different. They're at a different point in their life. Do they have children? Do they have elderly parents? Do they feel they have transferable skills so that if they lost this job or this workplace became intolerable to them, that they could move somewhere else, or did they not? And all these questions are so individual. And yet some of the rules of the game are not individual. So I think I am hoping the scheme will help women navigate their own way across that board to a position where they feel comfortable with the decisions that they've taken, and confident that they've handled this the best that they could, and less alone, just less alone.
Yeah. I'm confident we can do that for you. I'm confident that I know the solicitor's working on this, and I'm confident we can do that for the people who use the service. So I've got here. So you mentioned previously that women can't get equality without information. So can you expand on that a bit? I mean, I think I know what you mean, but people out there might not be sure.
Well, so I mean, denial of information is something that many employers use to perpetuate unfair pay structures. And I mean, just take my case, for example. I didn't know about my pay disparity until the BBC was forced by some particular rules relating to the BBC to publish the salaries of its high paid staff. At which point I discovered that the person who I imagined was being paid equally with me was actually being paid nearly twice as much. And it was at that point that my struggle, my fight for equal pay began. But if the BBC hadn't been forced to that, and other employers are not, they're not public sector employers with the same rules about disclosure, then they're not forced to disclose these things, then women can't even know. They will go to, in many cases, women go to the grave ignorant of the fact that they're being paid less. And often it's entirely by accident that they discover that they're being, that they are being paid less. And it can have been after 20 years of doing the same role as somebody else, or a role of equal value as somebody else. So that's the first point at which, lack of information is a real problem, that we don't know enough about where we stand in terms of money. And then, of course, throughout the grievance process that many women are expected to go through internally before they take their, get their case to tribunal, the employer can often withhold huge amounts of vital information. And do withhold it, because information is power in an equal pay fight. And often it's not till some way, as I'm telling you, already, Paul, it's some way, into litigation before you actually get crucial facts. And often the scales really fall from people's eyes then, but you have to be a very determined person to get to that point to find that information, because it's expensive emotionally, financially, and also in career costs. And your employer may suddenly view you in a very different light when you start asking these questions, and in an extremely different light when you start litigating against them. So people who actually take it to the point where they get all the information they need, those women are very few, for very good reasons. So actually, it would be great if we could front load information so that women had access to far more of it at an early stage, which is why I spend I spend some time in my book talking about what men can do in these in these conversations, because I think there's a huge role for men. They are the powerful people in the pay conversation, often, historically and traditionally, often within many of our workplaces. And so if your male peer, firstly, tells you what they earn when you ask, secondly, even better, is prepared to go into a pay conversation with your line manager, with your shared line manager with you, so that every time the line manager says, but he does something slightly different from you, but his skills are slightly different from you, the man who is your comparator is saying, no, I think you'll find our roles are the same. No, I think you'll find our experience is the same. No, I think you'll find her skills are, at least as good as mine. If you have that loyal a man as your comparator in this conversation, you're in good shape. But very few women enjoy currently support in the workplace. It does happen. I have come across quite, these heartening cases, but they're still fairly few and far between. And I think one of the problems is that men are not sufficiently aware of how important they are in that conversation.
So I was quite impressed when a few years ago the BBC stopped using NDAs in settlement agreements, and so people know if someone has settled an equal pay claim. And I've heard you speak before about the confidentiality and how that can get used. Do you think that signing up to NDAs as part of settlement agreements, does that keep the information sort of hidden a bit more? Do you think? What are your thoughts on that, just sort of generally? Because very rarely, unless it's a BBC type settlement agreement, would I see a settlement agreement without a confidentiality clause. And there is a lot of work going on around the use of NDAs, as they're called, in settlement agreements. Not quite coming over to the equal pay area yet. They're still very much sitting in the sexual harassment side, sexual discrimination side of things. I just wondered if you've got any sort of thoughts on that, having the BBC having stopped using them.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The BBC used to use them in relation to equal pay and many other workplace issues. And it was really after the Jimmy Savile scandal that the BBC stopped using them. And I think my own feeling about confidentiality agreements is I wish they didn't happen, because if you think about it straightforwardly, what is the point of them from the employer's position? The point of a non-disclosure agreement or some other form of confidentiality agreement after a settlement on equal pay, pretty much, I mean, somebody might argue with me on this, I don't know, but my own view is that, as in the cases that I've looked at, quite numerous, is that basically the employer is trying to shut the issue down and to prevent other women in the workplace knowing about it.
Jenga tower that you talked about at the beginning.
So there's an internal kind of taboo around it. They kind of shut the whole thing down so that nobody else knows. We had to pay this woman more. She challenged us all the way to tribunal and we had to pay her more, or she challenged us and on the way to tribunal we decided to settle. But we're now going to close this down so that you or other several thousand women don't know that that happened, and therefore you don't get alert, you don't get vigilant in the way that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. And then publicly, obviously it's reputationally damaging to employers with their public. And it's a bit like the Me Too movement and the row over non-disclosure agreements and other confidentiality clauses that happened in the backlash against them that happened after that, because people could see that there was a systemic problem. Suddenly people could see there was a systemic problem, but that it hadn't been visible because people had been silenced. And their silence had, I mean, it's an ugly word to say their silence had been bought with a non-disclosure agreement, but in its simplest form, that is what it can feel like, I think. And I know lots of women who have signed non-disclosure agreements, but very much against their will, and feeling that they're trapped into doing so because they won't otherwise get their settlement, and they need the settlement to pay their legal fees. Sometimes it's as simple as that. And so they feel obliged to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and that means they know their colleagues and women more widely will never know about the case.
I think that's right. So I think my view is that they're largely a power for good. I see the benefit, but it's sort of like a tide. It sort of takes with it some things that are a bit darker. So again, they help maintain the status quo so that they can be extremely useful and valuable to both sides, but they do contribute to the status quo. But the Me Too movement, that saw a big review of the use of NDAs, especially for employment lawyers. Our whole regulatory obligations around the use of NDAs changed as a result of that. So that's another example of women coming together to really make a good change. Solicitors, we've got to be so careful now that we try to put right into agreements around NDAs.
Good. I'm
glad. Brilliant what they did.
Yeah, because I think that, I think people would be really surprised if they knew, if I listed all the big employers, the big famous reputable, or we're a moral upstanding employer, if I listed all the employers who I know for a fact, because women have told me that, were, had NDAs around some of these issues, whether it's Me Too stuff or equal pay stuff, or other workplace issues, then, the public would be really shocked, I think, by learning the facts. And as I was saying a minute ago, to me, information is power. And if information is dispersed to the public, and in this case to women, that enables them to be more vigilant and to actually share that power.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've got my last question. I can't believe it. Let me check if I can rub in my eye. Nice question. I think hopefully this will be nice to answer. It's a nice summary question, nice conclusion. What do you believe are the top 3 biggest barriers to women acquiring equal pay? Top 3 barriers.
I think the first barrier is their own inhibition, the fear of challenging and rocking the boat.
Yeah.
I think the second barrier is serious prejudice, so deeply baked in about the nature of the workplace, what has value in the workplace, that employers often, when faced with an equal pay question from an employee, they just don't even consider it on its merits.
No.
They immediately go into fight it mode. And often, given the centuries of discrimination that all of our societies have seen, it's inevitable that there's going to be some pay discrimination against women baked into many pay structures in the world. And to have an open mind about and a generously grown-up conversation about how to tackle that with your female employees, rather than trying to squash them and treat them as children, that is a serious barrier. And you can really see the employers who don't have that prejudice as compared to the employers who do. And unfortunately, there's not enough of these yet, but that hopefully will change. And then the third barrier, I think, is the failure of many men to support women. That is a very serious barrier, is men not being able to or not wanting to see the reality of this problem and not getting behind their female colleagues in trying to fix it.
Yeah, that's great. So discomfort, denial, and men help out here. We need you.
Yeah.
They're the barriers. I've run out of questions. It's been such a joy for me. Again, you've been generous as you were at the professional conference. I really hope that people using the EPAS scheme get what you want them to get out of the scheme. I know that
Oh, so do I. I feel very confident, Paula. I think it's going to be great in your hands. And yeah, so go for it.
And thank you. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Take care.
Great.